Minnesotans served in America's two conflicts in the Gulf region, the 1991 Gulf War and the Iraq War that followed in 2003. Over the course of 30 years, thousands of veterans participated in these military campaigns.
The long deployment was gut-wrenching in so many ways for so many reasons, but it was also a very proud moment for all of us. I mean, we achieved a lot.
We had all our artillery firing, and that was one of the loudest things I'd ever experienced.
Those sort of missions were door guns blazing everywhere we went.
Now, hear Minnesota veterans tell the stories of these two conflicts and of the history they lived through. The Minnesota Military and Veterans Museum is the archive of the state's military history. It houses papers and artifacts from over 150 years of military activity, stretching back to Minnesota's role in the Union Army during the Civil War. Museum staff continue to collect material documenting the military actions of recent decades, including the involvement of Minnesota veterans in the 1991 Gulf War.
The Gulf War was the first of two Mideast conflicts that the United States found themselves involved in after the Cold War. This artifact from Desert Storm was donated to us by James Moser, a Minnesota veteran, and this is his helmet from being a tank commander in Operation Desert Storm. Just, an incredible artifact that he shared with us that will make its way into our exhibit galleries and is here for visitors to see and appreciate.
In August of 1990, Iraq invaded neighboring Kuwait, sending in armored units to occupy that nation's oil fields. More than 500,000 U.S. troops then deployed to Saudi Arabia as part of an international coalition. After negotiations failed to remove Iraqi forces, the coalition undertook military action. Minnesota veteran James Moser participated in the ground war against Iraq as a tank commander.
In the armored units, infantry units, you basically kind of knew that we were going to deploy. Based upon the president's comments, the UN Security Council, resolutions and everything politically that was going on, we basically knew that we were going to have to liberate Kuwait.
Veteran Mark Weens began his military career as part of the ground forces in the Gulf War.
For us, it was, okay, this is the big show. This is the game we're deploying, and we went down to Saudi Arabia, had all our tanks on ships, and they had to sail down there where we flew in, and we were getting ready to go.
The Iraqi army had just completed 8 years of desert warfare against Iran and was equipped with Soviet military hardware. U.S. military commanders anticipated substantial Iraqi resistance.
We felt we were incredibly highly trained. We were confident, but yet when you're told, hey, you're facing the big guys on the block at the time in the Middle East, you had confidence, but a little bit of hesitation was kind of built in by the pure numbers and also the amount of time that he had to prepare defenses.
During the Cold War, there was so many efforts to find out what the Soviets were making and what the capabilities were. And we were under the impression that their equipment was almost as good as ours. The planners thought this was going to be, take a month or multiple weeks to fight, and that we would probably have 1,000, maybe 10,000 casualties. And so you see the body bags come in and everything, and that's sort of a sobering aspect.
We were brought in by platoon, and we were told we anticipate 25% casualties. So as you look around with 16 guys and you look at, well, which 4 of us?
In advance of the ground war, the U.S.-led coalition launched the largest air campaign since the Vietnam War, directed at military targets in Iraq and Kuwait.
The first thing on the air war, they want to get rid of anything that can shoot down aircraft. whether it's fast movers or it's a rotary wing. They wanted to nude that and then go after the command and control, so that degrades their ability to communicate with their troops. And it was all very successful to set the conditions for the ground war.
As coalition forces prepared to repel Iraqi troops, military commanders signaled their intention to attack defenses that Iraq had built up in southern Kuwait. However, a different plan was underway in secret, a ground maneuver that would come to be known as the left hook.
The way Saddam set up, thinking that we would not invade Iraq, that we would just go to liberate Kuwait, all the battle positions that the Iraqis had were pretty much facing south. That's when we did sort of a security halt with everybody and briefed them, hey, we're going to conduct a deception operation. This is the huge left hook, where from where we were staying and where we had been training and presenting ourselves so that the Iraqis could detect us, we shot to the west.
It was called the left hook maneuver because when you look at it, a two-dimensional map, it's to the left, to the west, around the defenses that he had built up in southern Kuwait and along that coastline. And that was primarily to go into Iraq, to the northern part of Kuwait. And a series of engagements took place with objectives. And then the last big engagement, a meeting engagement on the northern side of Kuwait when they were trying to exit. So that's kind of what is referred to as the left hook.
Ground combat began on the 24th of February, with armored forces moving into Iraq itself, just west of Kuwait, in a surprise assault.
Before you actually experience combat, the typical behavior is I want to go, right? I want to go, I want to experience it. Of course, if you're on the football team, you want to go to the Super Bowl. And then after you experience combat, it's something you don't want to do, right? It's an emotionally draining thing. Driving on a Minnesota gravel road in the summer is nothing compared to eating the dust of hundreds of vehicles in front of you. It was a miserable experience, and got to be a little anxious, right? You're in Iraq.
We had a primary objective. There was a unit that was on the border, not a frontline unit. It would be probably something like a reserve component unit that was just called up onto the streets of Baghdad, go down there, give them a bunch of equipment. And those guys were just eating rotted tomatoes, and they were on a communication, and they gave up right away as soon as they saw us as we crossed the border. What ended up happening was we drove up so fast, we blew through that first division because they all surrendered, and then we drove right on to that first objective. We had all our artillery firing on it, and that was one of the loudest things I had ever experienced.
Coalition forces pushed on and encountered Republican Guard units near the port city of Basra, where a major engagement took place.
There were a number of Republican Guard divisions. They were trying to exit Kuwait and into Iraq. That last day, if you will, that last 12 hours was kind of a rolling off and on, where we would experience a lot of bunkers, a lot of small arms fire. I distinctly remember I could see him, so maybe 50 meters away. A guy had stood up who was in behind a berm, and he had stood up and he fired an RPG. And I remember watching the RPG come in and went between myself and my wingman. And at the time, I thought, how did he miss me? This battle went on for what I remember, probably about a half hour. And it was as if you took a baseball bat and hit a hornet's nest. They were launching everything they had, and it probably took 10 minutes And I've never seen so many people waving whatever they had that was white in the air. And there was hundreds of them that surrendered.
Ground combat operations ended after 100 hours. The Iraqi military, including most of Saddam's elite Republican Guard units, had been neutralized. Coalition forces stopped short of Baghdad. Peace negotiations left Saddam Hussein in power, but the settlement required his government to eliminate chemical and biological weapons.
You know, these wars, they've happened periodically. They'll continue to happen, right? I think it was Plato that said only the dead have seen the end of war. And you look back in our history, every 10, every 20 years, whatever it may be, but it's all timing. The whole Desert Storm experience to me is, it was all timing. It was, looking back on it, none of my men were injured or killed. You know, we all came home safely. And I was extremely fortunate to experience that.
Just over a decade later, America would find itself engaged in a second war in the Middle East over disputes about Iraqi weapons. Thousands of Minnesotans would become involved in the second Iraq conflict, which involved the largest American troop deployments in decades.
Less than 10 years later, under somewhat different circumstances, we decide to remove Saddam Hussein in 2003. Some of those same troops that fought in that first Gulf War find themselves fighting in that second Gulf War in Iraq. This is the flight suit worn by Major Patricia Baker as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom, flying combat helicopters into Iraq in support of ground forces. To have this artifact in our collection is a real testament to the men and women from Minnesota who served in Operation Iraqi Freedom.
The Iraq War began in 2003. U.S. and coalition forces massed on the Kuwaiti border to invade Iraq, with the goal of removing Saddam Hussein from power. Veteran Patricia Baker was a helicopter pilot who participated in Operation Iraqi Freedom. In March of 2003, she flew into combat in Iraq in support of American ground forces.
You look at Iraq on a flat map in briefing after briefing after briefing, and it gives no real insights into what the assault on your senses is going to be in the spring of 2003 as you're actually flying a helicopter over that terrain. We landed at Baghdad International Airport, and it was deserted. It was absolutely deserted. We landed our helicopters there, and there was nobody on the other end of the radio to even talk to. We thought there'd be more of a fight. We thought there would be more fight in the war zone that we'd just entered. But everywhere that we landed, things were abandoned. We thought it was going to be a very short war. We were very convinced. If the Iraqi military hadn't shown up to fight, then we were going to sweep through the country and it would be a lot like Persian Gulf War I. We were quite convinced. It didn't unfold that way. The fight came, just not at first.
Fighting between coalition forces and Iraqi troops became concentrated in Baghdad and other cities. Most formal Iraqi military resistance collapsed by mid-April. President George W. Bush declared major combat operations over in May of 2003. However, fighting by regime loyalists and others continued on, and attacks on U.S. forces began to build once again.
During the summer, it went from just flying from location to location in country to prepping for and executing large-scale air assaults It's shifted to kinetic. Now we were in a war fight. It was about clearing towns and villages, sweeping out insurgents. Every aircraft was filled with my fellow soldiers that needed to be time on target at a certain location in a military grid, a 10-digit grid sometimes, that I had to hit with my GPS with every airframe in my company at an exact time, because another wave of helicopters and another wave of helicopters and another wave of helicopters was going to be bringing in more and more soldiers to conduct that assault. Those sort of missions were door guns blazing everywhere we went. I came back off of R&R. It's a short respite leave that they give you from the war zone. And it was the day we caught Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein was captured in December of 2003, putting an end to what remained of his regime. Despite his capture, the insurgency within Iraq continued to grow, leading to a chaotic security environment throughout the country.
The insurgency was made up of a number of forces. Some of them were sectarian, particularly Shiite clerics that ran things. But it was also former Iraqi military who had set up their own sort of organized crime units. So there was a lot of fighting that needed to be done on a number of different fronts. There's a lot of security work being done, a lot of patrols. It was much more dangerous in terms of improvised explosive devices, snipers, bombings, and it was not like you were fighting on the front and move forward. The conflict was everywhere at that point.
Thousands of Minnesotans ended up serving in Iraq, particularly through the Minnesota National Guard, which deployed over 8,000 troops over the course of the war. One Minnesota National Guard combat team ended up being the longest-serving military unit in the Iraq War during the 22-month long deployment.
The long deployment was gut-wrenching and in so many ways, for so many reasons, but it was also a very proud moment for all of us. I mean, we achieved a lot. We're the only brigade that I'm aware of that figured out that EFP. Explosive form projectile was the most lethal weapon in the war in Iraq from 2003 until 2011. If you look at the statistics, what killed the most Americans, it was the EFP. It's an Iranian weapon that was employed in the Shia parts of Iraq, and it had a 90-some% casualty rate. It was a big problem, and it scared the hell out of everybody because there was no armor. It would go through an M1 tank. I mean, you couldn't protect MREP, wouldn't stop it. All the up-armored doors wouldn't stop it. The only defense against an EFP was to not get hit by one.
Minnesota soldiers eventually devised a method to counteract EFP attacks. They maneuvered their convoys to avoid lethal hits to the passenger compartments. Vehicles might be damaged, but soldiers survived.
In the long deployment, we figured it out, and our guys defeated it through using pencil and ruler and engineering paper. It was a bunch of smart kids bringing their civilian skills to the battlefield and figuring out really tough problems by not accepting the Army answer. That's what saved those lives.
By 2011, American military forces had been withdrawn from Iraq. The U.S. continued to support the new Iraqi government as it was challenged by an ongoing insurgency. That support included Operation Inherent Resolve, which aided the Iraqi military in its fight against the Islamic State. During that operation, Joseph Skraka deployed to Iraq in support of Defense Department communications.
Operation Inherent Resolve, that was the response to the Islamic State in Iraq and Levant. As ISIS, took over Raqqa and Syria, and then Mosul, and kept coming south all the way down to just north of Baghdad. Iraq requested U.S. support to defend Baghdad and eventually start pushing them back north. But our job was to support the Iraqis in them retaking their nation from ISIS. And we were not doing the fighting on the ground. Our job was to support them, advise, accompany them on missions, but not to do their actual fighting. We'd support them in the air with air support, artillery, and close air support, but we were not doing the fighting on the ground, and that was fairly unique. And I think by the time we left in October of 2017, both Mosul and Raqqa had been liberated, and it was fantastic because I got to see that progress for the year that I was there. My tour as part of Operation Inherent Resolve was extremely rewarding for me professionally. But at the same time, I had 2 young boys and a wife that I loved very much that I had to leave in the United States. My wife was pregnant at the time that I deployed. You know, I'd try to talk with her and my boys by Skype. They were, I think, 4 and 2 at the time, very young. And, you know, that was difficult for me. I was just getting to know them as they were growing up, and then, you know, I had to leave them for what ended up being a pretty extended deployment of 14 or 15 months.
I got back to Fort Hood, Texas in the 3rd week of March 2004. And I was changed. After that many months not sleeping in a bed, 8 months sleeping in a tent, after eating that many MREs and flying that many combat missions, I was different. I wasn't the mother of a 2-year-old and a eager young captain like before I left. I came back and all of a sudden my son was 3. Zach was 3. How did that happen? Oh, that's right, I just spent the year in combat.
So, you know, I missed my son's sophomore and junior year in high school. I missed my daughter's 7th and 8th. Yeah, saying goodbye to your family is never easy for anybody. I got to do that a few times. But unlike many, I got to say hello again too. So my kids paid a price, my wife paid a price. No doubt about it. But, you know, they served their country too.
Thousands of Minnesota veterans served in America's 2 Gulf Wars. In the years that followed, they went on to become teachers, firefighters, lawmakers, and neighbors. Today, many stay involved in educating their fellow Minnesotans about the value of service to the nation in all the forms that takes.
You know, looking back on Operation Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom, it's clear that Minnesotans in large numbers fought in both wars. And oftentimes, those were National Guard members from Minnesota. Citizen soldiers that are called upon and deployed to conduct themselves in hostile environments and in war situations. And at the same time, a credit to them and their families and the communities that they live in, because they've returned home after these conflicts, resumed their life, their jobs, their families, and you know they walk amongst us today. And to come home again and continue to enrich their community and our state is really a tribute to them, their families, and the communities in which they live.
So today at Camp Ripley was amazing. I came back to Camp Ripley. I was invited back by the museum to do an up-close tank talk. And I do it, you know, I do it to share. I do this in hopes of just building awareness that, you know, just because a significant event happened 30 years in the past, it doesn't make it insignificant to the people that were there or the families that were involved. I'm just trying to spark interest and awareness.
So I primarily teach the seniors at Creighton-Durham Hall, JROTC program, and our curriculum is focused on leadership. It's preparing these students to be ready for the next chapter in their lives as American citizens and teaching them the importance of service.
At this point, we're going to do a change of command.
Teaches leadership to young people teaches them the values of the Army that will serve young people well, whether they go into the military or they go into business or anything that they do throughout their life. I really feel honored to be able to pass that on.
Opening. Attention! Bring your units to present arms! Present arms!
I grew up in a community where there were so many veterans. The impact of veterans in communities, whether you're still in public service or you're starting a business or you're taking care of your family, it's that sense of building a team, having a mission, and doing what's best for the entire group. It's been the privilege of my life to serve the United States.